We have invited into our studio the resident conductor of the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra and conductor of the University of Manitoba Symphony Orchestra, headlining it on Monday night at Centennial Concert Hall with a really, really great program. Another installment of the WSO Impressionist Festival coming at you. Very exciting. Welcome back to the Diamond Lane, Julian.
Sarah, it is always an honor. It is an honor to be on the Diamond Lane. Anytime that I'm here, I have a great time.
Even when I don't turn on your mic right away.
It's okay. I can live with that. I don't need my mic turned on all the time. It's just, whenever you get to it.
You're, among conductors, it's a rare trait, friend. Regardless, hey, so you have lots of responsibilities here in Winnipeg. Not only are you the resident conductor of the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, but you also spearhead everything that goes on with the University of Manitoba Symphony Orchestra. Their programming, educating these kids, really getting them into the repertoire. Has the University of Manitoba Symphony Orchestra ever played on Centennial Concert Stages Hall?
As far as I know, and I'm almost positive that this is the first time that the University of Manitoba Symphony has played on the stage at Centennial Concert Hall in our own concerts. Some members of the orchestra have played on the stage, but not as the University of Manitoba Symphony. Although we have played an event on the past 3 years of WSO Festival. So, for example, 2 years ago was the Nordic Festival, and last year was the Mahler Festival. We did a concert with Brandon University's orchestra. We put them together.
And that was at Jubilee.
And that was at Jubilee Place.
Right.
That's right. And then this year we are honored and very excited to be at the hall. So it's really cool for everybody involved, and I know that the orchestra members are very excited.
I can imagine. And this program is so exciting too. So this is all part of the Impressionist Festival, the whole idea representing this era and this movement in music. I noticed there's some predictable ones for Berlioz, Honegger, pretty cool. But also there's Sibelius and some new names I did not recognize. So just lead us through the program.
Sure. Well, in coming up with this program, basically, in thinking of it, I thought, what can we do that would be different than what the Winnipeg Symphony is doing? And the Winnipeg Symphony is playing, basically, they're playing the hits. La Mer, Debussy, Ravel, Daphnis and Chloe, Berlioz Symphonie Fantastique. I mean, these are incredible works that we need to hear, and they're amazing. But we wanted to do something a little bit different. So I started to think about Impressionism, not just as this isolated event, but it's also something that happened before Impressionism and all this stuff that happened after. And so I started to think about what are these pieces? What are the pieces that we could think of through our Debussy goggles and sort of have a new appreciation for them through that filter as being somewhat impressionistic. And also there's other part to this program is that I started to realize and think about jazz as well, which not only has a close relation to the music of the early 20th century in France, but there's a sort of reciprocal appreciation there because there was a lot of influence from jazz to French music and vice versa. So Steve Kirby has directed the Millennium Ensemble, which is going to perform as part of this event as well. And they're going to be playing some Herbie Hancock, and they're also playing some original music of Steve's, which is awesome.
Amazing.
So we're so excited to have the Department of Jazz Studies there as well to think about, to even go outside the box, further outside the box and think, well, how does Impressionism manifest itself in improvised music as well?
Totally fascinating. I cannot wait to be part of this. So we're starting with the Forêt, and we go through the University of Manitoba Symphony Orchestra's program, which is really, really eclectic. And then that's without intermission, right?
That's right. It's without intermission, and there's a little sort of interlude where we play a purely electronic piece by Ingram Marshall, which I think, I've never done that before. And it just sort of clears the air a little bit and lets us go to sort of part two of the program. But the first four pieces on the program were designed to operate kind of like as four movements of a symphony would, even though they're not related in any particular way.
So walk us through those four pieces.
Sure. So the first piece is the prelude to the opera Penelope by Fauré. an opera that probably most of your listeners have never heard before. Most people tell me they've never heard this piece before. It's an incredible work, just the prelude. The amazing thing about Fauré is that people think of him as a kind of anti-Wagnerian. If you think of it, Fauré is the one of the French composers that was not influenced by Wagner at all, and yet he uses Wagner as the main model for his opera, his first opera, which was written in 1913. In many ways, I mean, in the structure of it, in the fact that he uses leitmotif, and actually in the fact when it's kind of a throwback because it has this classical Greek setting as well. And when I listen to the piece, it's inescapable that Wagner's imprint is somehow in this music. So I thought it was kind of particularly interesting to present on this program because you hear a side of Fauré that we don't always get to hear. And also, to be perfectly honest, I don't know if this is taboo or not, but as we're thinking about Impressionism and French music in different ways, I almost had Wagner on this program.
Wow.
And so I thought if there was one piece of Wagner that we could put here, it would be the Forest Murmurs from Act 2 of Siegfried, which is a nature depiction and which sort of has a lineage going towards Impressionism. And, part of this is also that, Debussy really didn't appreciate the fact that he was called an Impressionist. And I think that he really respected Wagner's music in many ways. And I think a lot of musicians did, even though maybe they didn't want to admit it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we have this piece by Fauré, and then following that, we go into some music of Berlioz. And Berlioz is another, even though we talk about the Symphonie Fantastique, and he is a French composer, but by the end of the 19th century, many French composers are trying to disassociate themselves with Berlioz. And the cool thing about this, there's kind of two cool things. This piece that we're going to play has not been played in Winnipeg for a while. It's the Royal Hunt and Storm from the opera The Trojans, which is kind of Berlioz's masterwork. It's an opera in 5 acts. It's a grand opera. It's really, really long. It's huge.
Yeah.
And one of the cool connections here is that while Fauré's Penelope deals with the story of the Odyssey, the Trojans deals with the story of the Aeneid of Virgil, and it's the other side. It's the Trojans instead of the Greeks, and so This is one way to go through it. But Berlioz, because he was more popular in Germany and in Russia, and then so he kind of influenced Wagner in many ways and influenced people like Mussorgsky and Rimsky-Korsakov. It actually, because of the Franco-Russian alliance and the sort of interest in Russian music in France, it comes back around through those Mussorgskys and Rimsky-Korsakovs back to people like Debussy and Ravel in a kind of interesting way.
Amazing.
And so when you hear this particular, and it's also a nature depiction with hunting horns and bass drum, thunder, and lightning. So it kind of is right up our alley.
Absolutely.
And so after that, we go to Honegger's music. He was part of this group of 6 composers, Les Six, but maybe he was the least revolutionary of them. And when you hear this piece, the Pastoral d'été, which is a beautiful piece, the first time I heard this was at a Boston Symphony concert, and I kind of fell in love with it. And this piece, in a certain way, is... it's been described as a latter-day prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. And it's a kind of early piece of Honegger, and it has a little, a little inscription by the poet Arthur Rimbaud, I have embraced the summer dawn. And if you just think about that and listen to this music, you'll sort of understand exactly what it's all about. And the final part of our little first segment is this piece by Sibelius, the 4th movement of his Lemminkainen Suite. Now, we don't often think about Sibelius as an impressionistic composer, but in my work with Sibelius, and as an artist and as a musician and as a listener, I hear things in Sibelius that I think, as he's a contemporary of Debussy and these other composers, that he's using this sound world and trying to achieve something similar to those composers, but with a completely different language. And it's often brought up that the famous movement from this suite, which is the Swan of Tuonela, is this incredibly impressionistic work that actually predates the Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. But the Lemminkainen's Return is this incredible story. It comes from the Kalevala. It's the Finnish mythological saga, and where Lemminkainen going to get revenge on the kingdom of Pohjola, and then he becomes frozen by a frost god, and then he somehow convinces himself to be unfrozen and goes across the ice but can never get there, and then eventually summons 2 golden horses and rides back to where he came from.
Some of the most programmatic elements, probably, of the Impressionist Festival in the first half of this program. Really? I mean, kind of interesting, hey? That's cool. Considering it's an Impressionist Festival and having these very clear programs. Very interesting. Really cool. And so then, we mark the halfway point with that bit of electronic interlude that is also named after Sibelius. There's something. Yeah, tell us about that.
So this is an early electronic work by Ingram Marshall. Let me just talk about Ingram Marshall for a second, because probably most of our listeners here in Winnipeg are not familiar with his music, but I actually have a long kind of personal relationship with him. And the first time I met Ingram, when I first started my graduate work at Yale.
Mm-hmm.
And
we're speaking with Julian Pellicano, by the way, and just to check in with y'all, the resident conductor of the WSO and conductor of the University of Manitoba Symphony Orchestra, heading the Monday night installment of the Impressionist Festival. We're about halfway through this, illuminated program. So Ingram Marshall, you did your master's at Yale. You did 2 masters at Yale.
I did 2 masters at Yale, and when I first showed up at Yale as a percussionist, I started doing. I kind of got thrown into the fire there, conducting quite a bit. And one of the first concerts I conducted was a performance of Ingram Marshall's brand new double guitar concerto with Ben Verdery playing classical guitar and none other than Andy Summers from The Police playing the electric guitar part.
Amazing.
And this is Ingram's piece called Dark Fluorescence, which is a totally awesome piece. And the electric guitar and the acoustic guitar are actually quite beautiful together. And Ingram is a composer who has worked with electronic media for a long time, since the 1960s, and he's a West Coast composer. He's very close to John Adams, especially in the early days, but still, of course, today. And he is a composer that they have been trying to figure out what he is for years. They called him a minimalist, a West Coast minimalist, a romantic minimalist. Basically anything you can come up with, they've called Ingram Marshall that. And it kind of got to me when I started thinking about Debussy, who hated being called an impressionist. And because Ingram came up with a term for himself, an expressionist. and honestly, on paper, that looks like kind of pretentious. But if you know Ingram, you know he's just fooling around. It's kind of like you can't categorize my music, really. And he's a very, very sweet guy and an amazing composer. The other connection with Debussy is that he also studied in Bali, and he's a master of the Balinese flute, the gambu. And so a lot of his music has some Indonesian scales, and also he often records himself playing the flute and then tape loops it, as he does in this piece that we're going to play of his. But the first piece, the electronic piece, is called Sibelius in His Radio Corner. It's from, I think, 1973, and it is a tape loop piece, and in the middle of it, he actually puts some of Sibelius's music through this kind of foggy filter, and we hear maybe one of the most modern parts of Sibelius's symphony. It comes from the second movement of his 6th symphony, which is not very well known, but it's this incredible moment of stasis, and it almost sounds like you're listening to a piece by Philip Glass or Steve Reich, but it was Sibelius in I think that piece was written in 1921. And when it's put in this context, it sounds like something totally different. And it forms a nice bridge from Sibelius's own music to his music through this filter to Ingram's music. And the piece that we're going to play by Ingram is a piece that I actually recorded for New World Records with Ingram, and it's a piece called A Peaceable Kingdom. It's for orchestra and tape, and it also involves some electronic keyboard as well. And Ingram made some very crude recordings of I guess it's a village funeral march in a town right on the Serbian-Bosnian border in the late 80s. And he also had some church bells that he recorded in Italy on Lago di Como. And he's tape looped these and put these together and created this piece. And if you think about Impressionism and what they were trying to achieve by creating a mood without maybe necessarily saying anything specific or in particular. I mean, this piece is a natural extension from Debussy through Varese, who is the father of electronic music, and Debussy basically made it possible for us to live in Ingram Marshall's sound world, and I think it's great that we get to play it.
What a creative program, Julian. Like, I cannot wait to see this on Monday night. It is happening at 7:30 at Centennial Concert Hall, the University of Manitoba Symphony Orchestra, with, of course, Maestro Pellicano at the helm. They also featured the University of Manitoba Women's Chorus, conducted by Elroy Friesen, as usual. They will be performing on Monday night. I am so excited. Oh, and afterwards, of course, after this great program we've just spoken of, on the Piano Nobile will be the Millennia Jazz Ensemble, a couple of Steve Kirby's original works and some extensions of Impressionism. Very, very exciting. Herbie Hancock, I can't even. I'm so stoked. So stoked. Join us, wso.ca for more info. And Julian, thank you. It's always a pleasure. Come back soon.
I would anytime. Anytime I will be here. You just say it, I will be here.
High five. All right. Okay, we're going to go to a short break and then come back with some more great music here on Classic 107.